All right, let's talk about a writer who was basically a modern novelist trapped in the Victorian era. His name was George Meredith. And while he was writing alongside folks like Dickens, his work was pointing somewhere completely different, straight into the future.
So that's the big question, right? What made this Victorian novelist feel so, well, ahead of his time? To figure that out, we've got to look at how he totally blew up the traditional way of telling a story.
And that brings us to the first big piece of the puzzle. He went inside the human mind. See, Meredith wasn't just about what his characters did. No, he was obsessed with what they were thinking and feeling deep down.
This right here was a huge deal. I mean, we're talking long before writers like Virginia Woolf or James Joyce made it famous. Meredith was already playing with ways to get right inside a character's head. He wanted to show us all of it. The messy, unfiltered, even contradictory thoughts. You know, the stuff that would basically define the modern novel in the 20th century.
And just so we're all clear, that technique is called stream of consciousness. It's exactly what it sounds like. It tries to copy the way our minds actually work. You know, messy, jumping all over the place. For his time, this was, well, it was wild. A huge break from the neat, tidy stories Victorians were used to.
And if you want a perfect, powerful example, look no further than his work, Modern Love. It's not actually a novel. It's a series of poems he wrote about his own very real, very painful divorce. It is just, wow. It's this masterpiece of psychological honesty, completely tearing down all the fluffy romantic ideas of the time to show the raw, ugly truth of a marriage breaking down.
Okay, so let's check out his first big novel, The Ordeal of Richard Feverel, to see how he used this idea. The story is about a father who tries to raise his son based on this super strict scientific system. But, you know, life happens. Love happens. Meredith's point was pretty loud and clear. You can't box in human nature. It's way too messy and passionate for rigid rules. This was a huge shot across the bow at the whole Victorian obsession with control.
So this obsession with what's going on inside our heads, it wasn't just for writing personal dramas. Meredith weaponized it. He used it as a tool to critique the society he was living in, turning that sharp psychological focus on all of its flaws and ego trips. And you see this perfectly in what's probably his most famous novel, The Egoist. Seriously, it's considered his masterpiece for a reason. It is a brilliant, hilarious, and just utterly savage critique of selfishness, particularly the male ego.
The whole story really boils down to this clash of perspectives. You've got Sir Willoughby Patterney, who thinks he's God's gift to the world, the perfect man. But then there's his fiancée, Clara Middleton, who starts to see the cracks. She realizes he's a total narcissist. He doesn't love her. He just wants to own her. The whole book is this tense story of her trying to break free from this suffocating ego.
And Clara's struggle leads us to another thing that made Meredith so incredibly modern. His female characters. Clara wasn't a one-off. Meredith made a habit of writing women who were smart, independent, and just refused to sit back and be decorations in a man's story.
And you have to remember the time period here. Most female characters were just the wife, the mother, the girl who needed saving. Meredith gave his women agency. He gave them rich, complicated inner worlds and made them the heroes of their own stories, fighting for their own liberation.
I mean, just look at Diana Warwick from Diana of the Crossways. She was actually based on a real person, a famous socialite. And her story is a roller coaster. We're talking a failed marriage, navigating shady political deals, being at the center of a public scandal. And through it all, she's calling out the ridiculous double standards for men and women. For a character written in the 19th century, just amazing.
Okay, so when you put all of this together, the psychology, the social satire, the strong women, what do you get? What's Meredith's lasting legacy? Why should we still care about these sometimes, let's be honest, pretty dense novels?
Well, this little summary says it all. You've got Richard Feverel warning us about suppressing who we are, The Egoist calling out selfishness, Modern Love showing the painful truth of a breakup, and Diana of the Crossways telling the story of a woman's fight for freedom. Every single one of these themes, they feel like they could have been written yesterday.
So let's go back to that first question. What made him so ahead of his time? Simple. George Meredith was basically writing the blueprint for the modern novel while the Victorian era was still going on. That deep dive into psychology, that biting social commentary, and especially those complex, independent women, he was breaking new ground that would inspire writers for decades.
And I'll just leave you with this one last thing to chew on. Remember, Meredith's most famous book is about a guy obsessed with his own perfect public image. So, In our age of social media, personal branding, and carefully crafted online lives, you have to wonder, right? Is his critique of egoism more relevant now than it ever was? Just something to think about. Thanks for joining.